the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to the second part of show 15 of the Grey Hat Beard podcast, with the Modern Workplace podcast that talks about all things Microsoft 365 and beyond around the modern workplace. If you haven't heard part one, go and listen to that and hear Al and I talk about the news. And for those of you looking on YouTube, you may notice we have found Chris. Chris is alive. He is perfectly okay. I won't get into details, but suffice to say he wasn't drunk in a corner somewhere. I promise that. Any insinuation that it was complete lies. Nothing to do with bespoke badges or anything like that. So he's all good. So we are going into part two of this, and this was a much requested show. We've had a lot of interest in this one because we're going to try and talk about Power Platform licensing. One of the favourite topics that everyone kind of brings up and says it's all far too complicated and no one knows what's going in. So we're going to try our best to answer a few questions we've had and explain it. I think we're going to kick off talking about the sort of three different ways you can get into licensing. And I think three ways we think about mostly. Many of you have come from the SharePoint and Microsoft 365 background, and you get a license with that. Others would have come from the Dynamics background, and you get your licenses with that. And then there's also the option to go ignore the whole lot. You can have a separate license, just go purely for Power Platform. So I don't know, Chris, Al, if you want to take that any further than that, simplify, or we could just stop there, really.
I think we just stop there. I think that sums it up really nicely. Yeah, I think to start with, it really depends on the direction you're coming from as to your thought process around how you get the licensing. And I know, when I've worked with SharePoint and Office 365, when the Power Platform kind of started coming about, when Power Apps were released in. It was very much, you can just go off and do that. All you need is SharePoint. You don't need anything else. And so a lot of the SharePoint world kind of just went, well, this is a SharePoint thing, isn't it? You can just build this stuff in the SharePoint, use SharePoint as a data source, use Power Automate as your connectors and everything. And you don't really have to think about much more. And for a lot of the SharePoint world, that worked really well. All you then looked at was, do I need premium connectors for Flow or not? And I think, Chris, you probably have a different perspective on it coming from the biz app side of it. How did you guys get in from Dynamics into Power Platform?
It's an awesome question. So, yeah, I love what you said. I think it has being perceived to be a SharePoint thing. I mean, Canvas apps came from SharePoint. We were within the Project Sienna effectively. For us, it was a bit different. So in Dynamics, we sort of found things like Canvas apps a bit adjunct to what we were doing. So they were there, we were like, yeah, cool. But we all model-driven app people, right? So that was our focus. We very data and process focused. And when we found Canvas apps in particular, we found another way to build out elements of the solutions that we were creating. So it was just a really great way to add on to what we were building, but we didn't really need it. And I think you'll find with a lot of Dynamics people, their focus will be on data models and model-driven apps, and then they'll fill the digital holes with Canvas apps. The thing that I found was the biggest pro was using Power Automate flows. Like that, that for me was the thing. I was like, wow, because in Dynamics we've got Workflow, right? And Workflow does a fair amount of good stuff, but it's quite limited in what you can do, and you also can't split out across other systems. So we started using Flow as a data interfacing tool, not an integration tool, interfacing, so moving data, And it worked really well. I mean, it snaps into the processes that we were doing. It was brilliant in the background. It works with all the other elements of the Office stack. And my favorite part is the fact that, it's so beautifully intertwined with Teams as well. So for us in Power Platform, when Dynamics discovered it, it was very focused on Flow and less on Canvas apps. And actually, for me, Flow is my go-to automation tool right now. So that's how we got into it.
Yeah, I think the other challenge that we've had in the SharePoint space for many years is as soon as they announced the deprecation of InfoPath and the retirement of InfoPath, everybody started looking for an alternate solution, a way to capture data, store data. And I'm not talking about just simple forms. InfoPath had a lot of complex stuff. It could write to SQL, it could write to SharePoint. And there
that ability to hide things depending on who you are, where you are in the stage of that flow's the wrong word in this case because it confuses things, but that kind of pipeline of data and being able to change things there. Yeah,
that has been and still is, the ultimate aim of a lot of the SharePoint automation side of things. How do you actually get data, capture data, in the context of an intranet, capture it easily, put it into a line of business application, and then actually interact with it properly and report on it. And I think that's also where a lot of people started doing Canvas apps and saying, actually, well, we can do this really easily. We can write to SQL. I mean, I know Rory Neary, when I first met Rory, he was writing Canvas apps that were just writing to SQL. He had no idea about SharePoint. And he was probably the first person I met who was just doing Power Platform in that sweet spot in the middle where he hadn't come from Dynamics or SharePoint. He'd just gone, this is a tool that fits the purpose that I have. So,
So pulling it back slightly to the sort of SharePoint and Dynamics, and you two nicely took sides there. If we're, and Al, you mentioned standard there. So in terms of licensing, if you've got Microsoft 365, you can use Canvas apps and you can talk to Microsoft 365 services. So you can connect up to SharePoint, as you mentioned there. You can connect up to Power Automate with all of those. You can read from Excel, from OneDrive, etc., and do things like that. From a Dynamics point of view, if you have a Dynamics license, you can talk to Dynamics data. If we're talking about the standard Dynamics license you get, would you also get CDS with that?
You do indeed. So Dynamics is a Power App. It's built on CDS. That's all it is. So when you look at the first-party application layer with sales, service, marketing, field service, under the digital bricks that make up those applications is the common data service, now Dataflex Pro, which is awesome, right? So a lot of people say, I'm a Dynamics person. I'm like, well, therefore you are a Power Apps person.
Right. So if you have a Dynamics license, is it fair to say that you would have access to CDS?
Yes,
or
sir.
Sometimes you won't, but generally you'll have access to that full. There. And what about premium connectors? Is that then separate from that in both cases?
According to the current licensing guide, okay, with the Dynamics seeded app license, you have access to premium connectors. Okay. Now, here's the interesting part. This may be subject to change. I'm not sure what's being released, but it's going to get interesting.
Just very quickly, we mentioned Dataflex in the first part of the show, and I think we'll come on to that a little bit later. So that the kind of, and I know there's certain amounts we can say, certain amounts we can't say, and things. So we're certainly not here to try and trick any information out on this stage. But so generally at the moment, if you have Dynamics, you'll have a premium connector, so you could connect out to things like SQL.
Yes, sir.
Your license on that.
Now here's the thing that's going to baffle you. When we say premium connectors, so obviously you've got standard and premium. Standard connectors are typically personal productivity connectors. You use to do stuff within the context of yourself. The Twitter connector, the Outlook connector, various Office connectors. And in actual fact, the SharePoint connector is actually considered personal productivity because it's premium. The premium connectors, things like Oracle, Salesforce, SQL, think about all of those as business connectors that you need to use. So in the licensing guide, if you go onto page 6, and you take a look at the Dynamics 365 Power Apps rights with Dynamics 365 applications, which we call seeded Power Apps licenses within Dynamics, you can connect to anything using either standard or premium connectors, okay, within the context of the applications.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's
the really important element is it's all about intent, as they call it, isn't it? So as an Office 365 licensed user, I can do personal productivity, team productivity enhancements by accessing the services that I already have a license to access. Yep. If I want to then go into something that is more of a business solution, SQL, outside of the context of Office 365, then I need to look at upping my license level. And that's from a perspective of most clients that are starting off from a SharePoint Office 365 side, that's the challenge that they need to address is at what point do you step out of that space and into a different space? So whether it's HTTP, whether it's SQL, all of those are considered outside of what you already have access to.
And with the HTTP, that's because you're connecting to something else that isn't one of the kind of defined personal productivity, which I think is a great phrase of thinking about it. If you want to connect to one of those, then that's going into the business side of things. With one exception, that SharePoint, the REST interface, has been made available through the standard apps. So if you need to speak to SharePoint REST, you can do that with the standard licensing, but not Graph. If I'm right. So on that one, so that's good. Chris, you mentioned the licensing guide there. Is that the Power Platform licensing guide?
Yeah. So historically, with Power Apps, you'll have two licensing guides. You'll have the Dynamics licensing guide, and you'll have the Power Platform licensing guide. Power BI is not included in the Power Platform licensing guide, so it'll be Power Automate, PVA, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Apps. That's what you'll get in there.
Okay, and that details those things.
Yeah, they do. There can often be a little bit of ambiguity around it because there is a way to read it and a way to understand it. And the other thing I want to tell you is the licensing guide is exactly what it says it is. It is a guide. Okay. So the rule of thumb here, right, is, and I don't mean to sound rude, but if you haven't read the guide, don't ask the question.
I'll see you later. Sorry.
Yeah, the rule of thumb here is guide before guidance, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I think it's a great definition. Yeah.
Yeah, with respect to anyone that is asking licensing questions, I promise you, if you read the guide, you will find most things in there. There is ambiguity around things like multiplexing, which you do need to understand from a guidance perspective, and that's actually on page 2 of the guide. So when you open up the guide, I think, no, wait, they moved it now to the page 2 anymore. It's page, I've got to find it. It's page 3.
Actually,
it's page 2. Yeah.
If you have the link there, and you could ping it over just in the chat, and I'll make sure it goes in the show notes for everyone there. And for anyone who's listening and hears multiplexing going, what on earth are you talking about? Is that something to do with stereos from the 1980s? We will come on to multiplexing, I think, a little bit later.
Important to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at the moment, we talked about things in a fairly simple way. If you're in Dynamics, you've therefore got the CDS, you've got your big daddy, you can do loads of stuff. If you're on the Microsoft 365 side of things, you've got your standard connectors, you're all good there. If you want to go premium, then you're looking at 2 different licenses. You're looking at the per app or the eat all you want license per user on that side. So this is where it gets a little more confusing. If you go for the all you want, you get all the premium stuff, you get CDS with that, and you're all good. Per app, what do we mean by per app?
So an app is a mechanism or tool that allows you to interact with data from it that's stored in the data source, right? So if you think about the concept of, if I give you the example of a contact center, and Jeff phones up Joe in the contact center, and Joe answers the phone, and Jeff says, hey man, I want to log a complaint, and Joe says, okay, I'm going to log into my SQL database and open up table AB4 _ complaints and capture their information there. Never happens that way. Okay, you have a layer on top of it. You have an interaction layer in the form of an application. So it's basically business logic, right? And through that, you are able to guide the user into a mechanism to capture and interact with data in a more sort of succinct way that's far more palatable to them than an actual like firing up into a database. So that is effectively what constitutes an app. So when you are interacting with data, that top interactive layer that's visual is what we deem as an application.
So that could be, and am I right in thinking that could be one or more Power Apps? So if you had slightly related ones, so it's not necessarily a single Canvas app.
No.
If we say Al and I were at the MBAS hackathon, and we created the Canteen for Good app there, and there was one Power App that the end user would use, there'd be one for the canteen managers to use and things on there, because that's all in, I'm trying not to say one solution, but in some ways, if you put it in one solution, it would be considered an app. And there's no technical definition for that. That will be a conversation to determine what would be in that, is it?
Yeah, the way that I see this, and the way that I see, in anything within the Microsoft framework, is that it's kind of like if you see the cookie on the table and you feel like taking the cookie is the wrong thing to do, don't take the cookie. And it's the same as that thing, right? If you feel like you're going outside of the digital guide rails of building solutions like that and building applications, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And if it feels wrong, it probably is. That's just sort of how I felt about it. And I've been in many multiplexing wars and many app wars where we had another person that said to us recently, I'm just going to build a God mode app. So they use the £7.50 per user per month license. Yeah, and this was also asked to the product group directly. I'm going to build a God mode app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 5,000 custom entities and I'm going to service everything through that one app. And can I tell you what the response was? Go ahead. But you know what? You're going to get smashed with the API limits if you do that.
Absolutely. And so, I think that's the other thing, though, isn't it? When we're thinking about this, I mean, I know, we've gone in and reviewed some apps that have been built for clients, and they're 200, 300 screens in a Canvas app, and you're kind of going, why are you trying to do it that way? And I think again, it almost comes back to that intent. You've got the moral side of it. If it feels wrong, it probably is, but you've also got if it's one set of functionality and it's logically grouped, and you've got multiple interfaces for different personas or different users, but it's still that same fundamental business process that you're working on. Again, it kind of constitutes an app, and it makes sense. And you could stand up in court and comfortably defend it. And I think that, that's the other thing is, how you manage the definition, whether it's one solution, and I think you're probably talking technical solution in terms of deploying it, or whether it is one functional solution. If it's one functional solution, that sits comfortably as an app.
Yeah.
And I think we live in a world at the moment where people are expecting to get very hard and fast rules, but the reality is life doesn't often work like that. So I think this is a great example of that.
Let's just look at the guidance that we're getting at the moment for various things. There's nothing hard and
fast. Absolutely. And I think this is another one of those things where I love what you're saying there, Chris, is get the feeling behind it. And as you said, Al, can you stand up in court? I think the other one, if you have come from a SharePoint background, you're probably used to those limits and boundaries. You've got boundaries where things you absolutely can't do. And then I'm getting this the wrong way around. Yeah. And then you've got limits, which you could go over this limit, but you're going to start to see problems going to get complicated. I think this is another example like that as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think, Kevin, you're right. There's no absolute formula to this. But the guidance is there. And the other thing you got to remember here is that think about the number of customers and organizations that are actually leveraging Power Platform, right? We have to have different flavors of licensing and have to have different options, because if we had one license, you can't solve the problem for everyone. I mean, you guys, I know the organization that you guys work for is a large organization, and you implement large projects. I also know people that are selling one Canvas app at a time to the guy running the cabbage shop up the road. And we have to have licensing for everyone. We can't not. And that's the thing, right? So people get cross and say, oh, the licensing guide's too complicated, but actually it's really not. If you just read it and you take the time to absorb it, it's really simple. But we need to have lots of flavors of this so that other people can leverage this. Sorry, our target audience and our addressable market for the platform is larger. That's the important thing.
No, I agree. So I think that's good. And what we've been talking about so far is Power Platform licenses. So generally those the per app and the all you can eat, and as you say, that's for Power Apps, CDS, and Power Automate. What's on there? Other license we've got are Power Virtual Agents, so they're licensed completely separately, and they get licensed on a usage level, isn't it? I should have checked this and remember this off the top of my head. I think it's 2,000 uses per month, isn't it?
The number of sessions per month, so the number of times people access it.
Yeah, so that's completely independent of everything else, and obviously you need a Flow license if you're going to be talking to Flow. That's separate from that. That's a number. Doesn't matter who's using that. That could be anyone. It's just a pure number for those bots that run there. And then you've got Power Portals. I'll be honest, I can't remember for the life of me how that's licensed.
So that's the number of authentications and again measured sessions. So the number of people accessing it again per month, very similar to the Power Virtual Agent, and that's done on volume.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The portal stuff is a lot of people see the licensing is quite complicated, but again, it's not. It's just tier logins, really.
Yeah,
that's all it is. Yeah,
it's always fun to try and predict how many how much usage you're expecting,
Yeah.
But I think, and for both of those though, you've got the tools in the platform to understand what's being used, so it's quite visible as to what you're being charged for, what you're not being charged for both of those as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're getting better at Microsoft at making stuff more clear. I mean, if you go into admin.powerplatform.com, you can pretty much see everything in there. It's pretty open, and it's just getting more and more. When I went in recently and I was looking at the number of API calls I was making, I was like, okay, well, this is awesome. Like, I can see everything. It's great.
And I think one of the things, when you look at the licensing guide for the Power Platform and you start to try and work out in advance, what the cost is going to be,
yeah,
it's a lot easier than, I remember trying to do the same thing with Azure. Well, how much are we going to be spending on consumption of something that we're building for Azure? I don't know. Let's try it and see. That was the only way to cost it. With this, you can actually put it in, and we do this with clients. We say this is going to cost this much for the licensing because you've got this many users. That's it. It's done and dusted, and you can then just build that into a business case. So it's very easy to kind of roll all of the costing of the licensing into a business case for one application or a suite of applications.
That's it. Yeah, I find it. I mean, like I used to work in pre-sales, and my part of my job was to do costing, and man, I remember trying to do Azure costing before, and it was really difficult. Like, you just don't know. It's assumption based.
You can't tell.
Yeah, you just don't know, and that was a real struggle for me. I think this licensing here, I'm going to raise a really, really maybe controversial point, but I think with this licensing, it's very focused on the technical layer. So if you're a solution architect and you're a good one, and you're knowing licensing and understanding licensing is part of your role. You don't necessarily, when you architect a solution, you build the solution based on the best possible approach, not the licensing. And then you license after, right? If you're trying to dodge bullets and go cheap, you will end up paying more later on. I can promise you.
And I think, but that's something that when a client turns around and goes, oh, well, we can't afford that, then you've got to draw back and go, actually, well, these are the benefits that you're not going to realize. Mm-hmm. This is the balance that you're striking. You are not going to get these features and this functionality. You might not have the maintainability, you might end up building technical debt rather than actually building something that's going to be staying on top of the technology as it moves forward. And I think all of those play into that business case, the justification for the licensing. You're not just getting, it's not a one-off. It is, you're buying into having updates coming through and more features and functionality being available to you.
Yeah, and that's that value discussion. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, like this concept of, so let me give you a use case, right? So what I saw this with my own eyes, and I see this happening all the time. So company, I can't give away the names of the organizations. This company has got 20 SharePoint lists, okay? And they have 40 flows running on top of those, all right? Here's the part, right? So I looked at this and I said, listen, this is a great solution. I looked at the form side logic in the applications, very Canvas app driven. And the logic was bonkers. Like, I've never seen so much expressions. That's code. It's code. I'm sorry. What they've done is they've written code. I've never seen so much code, and I've never seen so many expressions written in Flow to bypass. I mean, they were doing data transformation in Flow. No. No. So, like, I looked at it. I'm like, guys, you could do this if you buy a Dataflex Pro license now, or Common Data Service now known as Dataflex Pro. All these relational links you're making, you don't need to make. You can do that out of the box. And I said, even for the love of God, even maybe use SQL for this, because they were hitting delegation issues with data, right? So I'm like, even use SQL, but what you're doing here is wrong. And I basically said to them, you can charge somebody, you could get somebody to pay £7.50 per user per month to use the solution, but I know that you're charging them $1,000 a day to build this out. So you're creating more technical debt and you're providing a service to them, but based on the fact that you're just building stuff and you don't actually have a path. Dude, yeah, I'm actually getting cross because I looked under the hood and I'm like, this is wrong. And I promise you now, that is not the only time I've seen it. I run into this on a weekly basis. Yeah.
Are you saying, Chris, that SharePoint isn't a relational database when you're using it? Surely everyone knows that.
Well, Yeah, but this is the corners, isn't it? This is where the corners are being cut. You know, I mean, we've seen it working with SharePoint over the years. Oh, you get to that 5,000 limit, and then you've got to up the indexing, up the view limit. There's all sorts of workarounds. It's great. SharePoint will store more, but
Yeah.
you can't
I'd love
interact
to
with
come
it
back
enough.
to this chat in a minute if we go on to Dataflow, because I think that to me has filled a better thing. But I want to go back to the questions, because the one that actually triggered this show going on there was wanting of that Gaurav Mehta, former colleague of mine based in India, asked a question on there, and his real question is about, it's really where you've got people building and people using an application, where the differences go from there. So is there a difference for a license for building an application, and then do people get a different cost just for using the applications at all?
Nope.
And apologies for those not on video. No is the answer. So if you're building or using an application, it's the same license. If your application has premium connectors in it, you need to be licensed for premium.
Yes, sir.
It's as simple as that. So this is designed for power users. This isn't designed to be something that someone complex, a developer or a power user, builds and then gives out to a large number of users who wouldn't build. The whole point of this is a larger number of people can build the apps. It's not, the licensing model doesn't support that.
No.
So the way you've described that, you're paying for the connector. So whether you're developing or whether you're using, it's exactly the same cost. What you said around more people can develop it, absolutely. This is where we've got citizen developers, citizen makers, you know, anybody can develop it, but they're all licensed to use those connectors. And when you're thinking about, you know, the common data service and that just using Canvas apps or just using Flow, think of the common data service, you're storing the data in there. You're storing it in the common data service, whereas for Canvas apps, actually you're only using connectors. Whether you're using a connector to SharePoint, to SQL, to Twitter, to common data service, you're always using connectors. You're not storing any data. So whenever you're building those things out, you've got to pay for those connectors.
Yeah. And I think this pulls back to what you were saying about, you know, don't try and skimp with these things, get it done properly, and it will continue to work well.
On the money. You know, there's two things that we're going to charge you for: connectivity and data storage. Right? Those are the two core things, and it's actually going that way, right? So the more apps you build and the more stuff you connect to, you got to pay. And I'll tell you something else interesting. Everything that we're using now was built on Azure. Everything, right? Components on Azure. Guess who Azure's biggest customer in the world is? It'd be the Power Platform and Dynamics, folks.
Is it really? Not the Office side?
That might actually be Office. That's
one of those two anyway. Yeah.
It's Microsoft. So we
absolutely.
Yeah, we use so much, and actually it probably is Office now based on all the Teams utilization. So
certainly since lockdown. Yeah,
definitely. So yeah, I mean, look, we got to keep the lights on, and you know, the people building the foundations for us in Azure, you know, we use all their stuff, right? So it just makes sense that we'd have to pay for it. The thing is, the issue that I've got is that we were giving away too much stuff for free for a long time, and people got used to it. And now, like, we have to pay. It's just, you know, you're going to drive the car, you got to pay for fuel. That's how it works.
I love that statement, and that does open up a question if we start talking about Dataflex, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Hold that thought. I'm
amped, man. Okay, so I will tell you guys now, from a Dataflex perspective, there is a lot of stuff under NDA, which you guys know already. But there are things we can share, right? So I've got a document that I can't share the document, but I can tell you what's in the document.
Cool. Hold that thought. I think we got two more questions before we get into some of the Dataflex sides. So I think based on that last question, to me, if you've got one or two people building an app and you want hundreds, thousands using it, maybe Power Platform, that's not really where Power Platform sits, and you could be looking at other things to do that. But there's been a couple of questions from people, similar sort of side. One person who wants to create a gatehouse sign-in app. So basically want to create a Power Platform, Power App that people can use and sign in. So it's not really it's not really assigned to a user. When you go and enter your data, it wouldn't know that. So it's going to run unattended on an iPad in kiosk mode. And funny enough, I have a kitchen calendar doing exactly this. We managed to get rid of the paper one, and I now have a Power App that shows our calendar on an iPad in the kitchen.
How have you licensed that, Kev?
It's all licensed against me. So that's a good point. Actually, I shouldn't shout that too loud. Don't have to charge for the rest of the family, do I? They don't touch it anyway, so that's good. Or look at it. So if you did have an unattended app in a kiosk mode, what would be the licensing for that?
So you'd have a user with a license for it, whether that's an actual individual or whether that's like a service account. It would still have to have that user that was using that app would still have to have the right licensing. So where you've got that single license, that's all you need for it. You've got one user, and that's it. So, and we've done solutions like that as well, where you've got devices that you're just basically licensing that device to use it, and they've got the right licensing so they can connect to all those connectors.
My Wi-Fi dropped, but I think Al took it perfectly. The device licensing.
So, what's your next question then, Kev?
So the next one was a kind of extension of that. There was two related questions of this. Obviously, you've got Power Apps talking to CDS, great. But there's people out there like myself who love Azure, who write web apps, but also like the idea of the power of the CDS backend. So maybe don't want to extend it with the CDS, but they want to go a bit further. And how would the licensing work for that? So, for example, if you wrote a web-facing app, maybe it was going to go on either public website or internal to an organization that was using CDS data in the background. How would the licensing work for that?
Oh, this would be a can of worms, my friends. All right, I'm going to do my level best to disseminate this information. All right, so this is where multiplexing comes in. Okay, so let's just get that out the way. Multiplexing is creating means and ways to avoid paying for a license. Okay, and I'm not saying that this is multiplexing
in a justified way.
Yeah. So
yeah,
here's the thing, right? With the web app, now there are a couple of schools of thoughts on this, right? I'm not going to explore number one. I'm going to tell you guys about the second school of thought, because the first school of thought gets a little bit too detailed. So if you're consuming data from the Common Data Service in any way, shape, or form, and you're inside an organization, so if we're going to say Grey Hatbeard is the organization, okay, and Kevin Allen are employees, and you're internal, if you're consuming Common Data Service information and data, you need a license. I don't care how you're getting to it, you need a license. So if you've written a front-facing web app, so if you've gone and written something in React that connects to the CDS, you need a license.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it does get interesting, and in fact, this is why we have tools like portals and all of that. So what's really
if you have portals, and obviously you can only have the model-driven apps in front of that, you're then licensing on the portal side, and you're covered for it.
So if you build an internal portal, so for Grey Hatbeard, we now implement the Common Data Service, and you use Power Platform portals or Power Apps portals internally, you need a license, but you have to be licensed for the per app plan or the per user plan. The portals licensing doesn't necessarily apply internally, so that's have to have
external.
Yeah, okay. You have to have a Power Apps license.
Okay, I think that all makes sense. So if you wanted to write a web app to talk to the CDS for external people to use it, it doesn't matter. You'd have to treat them as internal and license external people that way.
So if they were external, if they were not part of your organization, so if they're not part of Grey Hatbeard, right?
Yeah.
And they're from Chris Corp, okay, and I'm accessing the Power Platform through a portal license, that's how you license it. If you have a front-facing, if you've built like a web app in React or something that connects to the Common Data Service API, that model is not that's going to be using a different model. So you don't necessarily have to have that external person licensed. What they will call you out on is multiplexing, though, and they will say that because we have a portals product, you're probably going to need to pay for a portals license.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. It's always a dark art where you're exposing your internal data publicly. and how, because the tools that you're using to capture and store it, you're licensed in a different way. So yeah, and that's that's been very similar for things like Project Server and SharePoint as well. How you share some of that content has always been interesting challenges around how you license it. But where there is a tool that is in place, like Chris says, with Power Apps portals, the safest way is to use those tools.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. So say we had, for example, Grey Hat Beards, we have the Etiquette of Microsoft 365 site. We wanted people to submit questions and store that data, and we thought that'd be great to have in CDS on there. But we didn't want to use Power Portals. We wanted to create a bespoke web app. The best way to do that would be to have that web app talk to some form of database, Cosmos or SQL, and then have an internal trigger that would put that into CDS.
Yeah, so that's fine. I can't see any issues with that, and requiring an external license for that. It's more so like, and this is where the multiplexing discussion comes in again, because it's kind of like it's in the eye of the beholder, effectively. And so I've got a theory, right? And I don't know 100%, and I've never actually had this cleared up for me, but if you're consuming data from the common data service, you need a license. If you're putting data in, okay, there is a school of thought that says that is not necessarily multiplexing. So using the data, you need a license. Putting data in, that's not necessarily a licensed interaction. And now so I'm going to caveat this hugely and say that is my opinion. That is not a Microsoft opinion, and something I've read, right? So I'm busy researching that at the moment. So the example is, if I've got a Microsoft form, okay, that does like survey results, okay, and you guys filled it in, and I use Flow to add that information to the common data service, I'm not consuming information, I'm just getting data, right? So I'm not providing any value to that user giving me the data. All I'm doing is getting it. And that's where I think, when you ask me what's the definition of an app, right? An app is interacting and consuming data. That form is not an app. So that's where I actually need to have this cleared up. I need to actually get a proper written response on whether that interaction requires a license or not.
Yeah, I think that kind of, I was going to say that gels with my thinking as well. Where you're just capturing data and you're writing it into a location, then you're not interacting with it as when you fill in that form. Whereas the person who's going to actually interact with that data, who's going to see the results of the data that's captured, change it, do stuff, they need that license. That's their app that they're working with. Yeah,
and that's it, man. I think this comes back down to the value discussion. What am I getting from the common data service? What am I getting from the app? If I'm getting something from it, then I probably need a license. If I'm just giving,
yeah.
I think the other one that I was thinking about in terms of CDS and how you consume the data, one of the massive benefits of CDS is the permission model and the ability to use the permission model. Yeah. And if you're surfacing that data without applying that security model, then you're
model. Yeah,
absolutely. And therefore you'd probably be questioning, why you'd be using common data service in the first place. So and I think that, there's so many reasons why you would justify paying for it in the first place. To then work around the licensing, you're going to be cutting corners.
That's where you're going to get stung. If you're trying to cut corners, you're going to get stung. So
can I tell you guys an interesting scenario on that? So my Twitter handle is the tattooed CRM guy, right? And there's a good reason for that, because I've got lots of ink. I have got some terrible tattoos. I'm not kidding you guys. I skimped on paying, man. I've got this horrible tribal tattoo on my arm. It is really bad, and it's because I went cheap. I'm not kidding you when I say I've had over 10 artists work on this tribal, and no one can fix it. It just gets progressively worse and worse and worse. Then on this arm, I paid like 500 quid for a session with my one friend Brent, and the tattoo is beautiful. He has done a beautiful job. I've never had to go for touch-ups. He's not had to do anything afterwards, right? And it's a beautiful piece. Now, here's the thing. The initial tattoo I got, my horrible tribal one, was 50 Rand. That is £2.50, folks. £2.50. Yeah. So I paid that, yeah. And I think the guy actually even used printer ink. And horrible. And it even got a little bit infected. It got weird, man. But that tattoo is still on me. I can't get rid of it. okay, short of coloring my whole arm in black. And no one can fix it. And the more I add to it, the worse it gets. Okay. If I just paid the $300 up front and gotten a proper artist to do my tattoo, I wouldn't have had any worries. And that's the issue that we've got, is that we go to customers often to try and cut corners, and we try and save them money, or the customer doesn't know enough. The goal here is we are consultants. We need to educate our customers. If the person tattooing this arm didn't want to just make a quick buck, they would have told me flat out, dude, this is a terrible idea. But they were just like, want to make money. This guy, the guy that tattooed this arm, I went to him with a design and he said, no, bro, we're not doing that because that's not going to work. We're going to do this. And then I agree, and it's awesome. And that's how we have to treat customers. I often talk to customers, right? And yes, I'm a partner architect, but I talk to customers a lot. And I have to sit there and be the bad guy. Like, I challenge them. I say, dude, you know, you're saying you want to put your data here, but in the long run, that's not going to work. It is not going to help you. You're saying that you want to build Alan brought up like a 500 screen canvas app with loads of expression language, with loads of expressions in there. You have to maintain that. Yep. So I told them, I said, you guys have to look after that. So you built it, you have to fix it. Now, I don't do that anymore. I tell them flat out, man. I mean, I've gotten quite blunt in my old age, but I just say that's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Which reminds me, Al, we should do a show on technical debt at some point. I know it's one of Gary's favourite topics.
Yes.
On that note, that gives us a nice segue to the one I keep pushing back, which is to talk about Dataflex. Because for me, when I first heard it, my first reaction was, oh, for goodness sake, not another name change. Then I heard what it was, and it wasn't just a name change. That there was Dataflex Pro, mostly a name change there, but Dataflex, for me, is that missing gap that can help sell things like CDS, because where a lot of people, they can see the value, but they're just never quite sure whether their organization will adopt it enough, will do things properly, will have. I've always liked the name Common Data Service because it's all about having your data in one place and making use of that. But that's quite a big step for an organization to go. And if you can persuade a company to do that, which is Al and I's job, we hope, there is huge value. But a lot of time people want to kind of get towards that gradually. And they always used to be it felt like a big jump to get to that. Yeah. To me, Dataflex gives you that capability to give it a go in smaller areas and then see the value you're going to get for it. And I think that to me is the most exciting thing around Dataflex. It's going to be that ability to see the value of CDS, to pick an app, a couple of apps within Teams. So you're getting all the value of Teams, that it's obviously growing bigger and bigger. And what's going to happen is people are going to put some data in there and they go, oh, I want this data there and I want this data there. And there'll be a lot of value in doing this. And suddenly people will see that license for Dataflex Pro now isn't as big. And I think that's where people will see this value. So instead of getting that £2.50 tattoo, they'll get a 50 quid one. It's a much smaller one. And then they can look at the much bigger one when they go, yeah, you know what, this works for me. And I think that's the good story there.
Yeah, this Dataflex story fills a digital gap that we've had with organizations for about 2 years now, where you've got the single app orgs, and what they do is they use the Power Platform for one app, and that's not actually providing that much value. So paying £7.50 per user per month for a single app doesn't necessarily go for the value conversation there. It doesn't promote it, because £7.50 for like 20,000 users is a fair chunk of change.
Yeah.
What about cutting down? So now with Dataflex embedded in Teams, you can do that off the seeded Office license and then grow into the Common Data Service or Dataflex Pro license later on. So and the best part is, right, this is what I love about Dataflex, not Dataflex Pro. Dataflex is that we have been struggling with referential integrity and relational databases, and people have been hammering them into SharePoint lists, which is fine to an extent when it's very simple data. But when you're getting these complicated referential models, you cannot do that. It's not the right thing to do. Now we've given the tooling out now. So now we have got a proper relational data facility in Teams that organizations can use for these bulk users. And that is, this exact scenario has been on the tip of everyone's tongues for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I think so. This morning when we were talking about the news, we've kind of commented that over the last 2 or 3 months, we've had a series of big Microsoft conferences that have all started to announce things from a technical perspective. And so we've had things like, the Power Platform Studio going into Teams, contextual Power Platform controls for Canvas apps in Teams. And then we get Dataflex dropped in on us to go, well, actually, now you can store your data there as well. And it's that kind of completion of that story that's been building up through the year, I think it will be very, very interesting, because to have the ability to have the same solution deployed into multiple teams as well, and say, actually, you've got departmental teams that are using the same solution, but with different data stores, I think that'll be a phenomenal experience for people.
Yeah, I'm amped, man. I think this is a game changer. And when you look at our competitors, I mean, we've got some amazing competitors out there like Honeycode and Mendix and OutSystems and that. I mean, and they're great, but I just think that this has kind of pushed us even further ahead. And I do really relish the fact that if we're gonna do well in this market, we have to have great competitors. But I think now this is just a massive step for us.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it.
So what's one of the first questions we had on Dataflex is what's the difference between Dataflex and Dataflex Pro?
Okay, so without breaking NDA in the world, every NDA in the world, I'm going to try and give you this information. So Dataflex Pro is your all singing, all dancing data facility in the cloud with multiple data sources behind it, high levels of security, mass amounts of referential integrity. I mean, it's basically, a lot of people make the mistake and think that, Dataflex Pro, Common Data Service, is just like a layer over SQL. It's not. No. There are multiple data sources behind that, including Cosmos DB. There's, we're using Elasticsearch. There's a whole bunch of stuff under there. So that's Dataflex Pro. Dataflex is a subset of that functionality. So we don't give you all of the data sources. I can't tell you the data sources under Dataflex, but I know what they are. We can't give you all of those, but there are a couple that you get. You don't have the same sort of relational model. Sorry, you don't have the same sort of security model as you do in Dataflex Pro. So security in Dataflex Pro goes all the way down to field level obfuscation of data, whereas Dataflex, you're not going to have as much security. It's going to be reliant on your user and teams. Also, your field types. So Dataflex Pro, you've got hundreds of different field types which you can use. Dataflex, you've got like 5 or 6, but they're, one of them is an image field, so I'm giving away the data storage now a little bit. One of them is an image field.
SharePoint, isn't it?
I'm not saying anything. I promise. So yeah, you've got a lot of functionality in there, but the part that I love the most about Dataflex is that you've got that relational functionality, and now I'm giving away the other data source for one of the other ones, but you've got this relational functionality. So you can actually build out like tables and link them to one another and be able to reference the data from those other tables with the actual referential integrity kept intact. So sorry, I'm looking. So it's really awesome, right? That's the part that we've been missing, and that's the part that I'm excited about. So that's the real difference.
Yeah.
And there is, so this is not 100% out just yet. If you want, we're on any of the Inspire calls. So anyone on the call, if you were on the Inspire calls, they released this to the public. There will be a migration path from Dataflex to Dataflex Pro for solutions that you build.
Nice.
Yeah. So if you go ahead and you build out like a timesheet management solution or an expense management solution, and then you find that you'd like to incorporate this in like a line of business solution, you can add that.
Chris, are there any scalability differences?
There definitely are.
So there'll be a natural progression point when you kind of go, actually, I've deployed Dataflex, but I'm not going to be able to scale it to the same extent as Dataflex Pro.
Yeah. So different capacity model. Okay. This is publicly available. So you're allowed 1 million records, right? And then typical type of usage is enforced at 2 gigabytes for the relational database storage.
Okay.
So that's per environment, so per Dataflex environment. And I'm reading directly out of the FAQ now, by the way.
And the per environment, you get an environment per team. I think they've said publicly as well, isn't it?
Yeah, you get each data. So you get 1 environment per team. So it says creation of new Dataflex environments will only be possible from within teams, and this is important. Will not be available in other ways, such as via the Power Platform Admin Center. So
that's interesting. So yeah. Bring on
one of your questions there, Al.
Center of Excellence is going to suddenly come into its own, isn't it?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what's going to happen there. The COE starter kit. So Manuela's been doing a beautiful job at that. And what I'm starting to see is some of the partners out there are actually building their own flavors of this. So now, if you think about offering Center of Excellence as a service type thing, this is going to get interesting. So I am amped for this stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah, there is going to be a lot of fun coming up in the coming year to see how this rolls out.
Just very quickly, for anyone who doesn't know what the Centre of Excellence is, I'll put some links in the show notes, and you really should read
and there is a new release
fantastic.
of it as well. There's a V2 out now, which has some great additions like Canvas app templates as well. It's got Sancho's template in there now as well.
Oh, that guy's next level, man. Yeah,
it's mind-blowingly good.
It's good. Yeah, this is exciting, and I think with this now easy to build sort of app layer within Teams, I'm expecting to see a huge sort of adoption of platform within Teams, which is going to be great. And I mean, Teams is just awesome as it is, right? So now sort of bringing your relational data piece in, now brings your collaborative side of the organization together with the data piece. That's what I'm excited for.
Yeah, it's gonna be quite a game changer.
I think we're stepping into a new era, if I'm honest.
Yeah. It was funny. I'd love to see the curve of my reactions as it was announced, when from the not another name change to whoa. You could sort of see it across Twitter. The kind of, as people picked all the different bits and the different information, there's a lot of excitement, because exactly as you say, it feels that game changer. It feels that step into the broader world, which has been missing for a little bit.
I think we'll put some links into the show notes about some of the really good blogs. I know Andrew Welch did a really good summary. I know Clarissa did one as well yesterday, didn't she?
Yeah.
So there's a few that we can put links into.
There has been, if I'm honest, there has been some ambiguity around what's going on with Dataflex and what's going on with Microsoft Lists.
Yeah. Wait, is that just because it's SharePoint? Oh, sorry, Microsoft Lists.
Yeah, there was some confusion on Twitter on what exactly was what. So some people thought that Lists is Dataflex and vice versa.
Oh, really?
No. There was one of the tweets that I remember responding to in great amounts of enthusiasm was why didn't they just call it Lists? And I'm like, no, they're different products. They're different things. Yeah. And in the FAQ, they actually say that when you're looking at it, right? So Lists are already great for quickly tracking data in Teams, okay? And then Dataflex is for actual Power Platform solutions.
Because Dataflex, there isn't an interface like a model-driven app on Dataflex. So you've got to build. It's purely the storage layer. And that's a key thing, I think, for you can't just drop Dataflex into Teams. You have to make sure that you actually build the interface that's going to actually sit on top of it and be surfaced in Teams.
Yeah. So you have to build the app layer.
Yeah. Which
is awesome. So we give you the relational database components. You have to build up the app structure, which is fine, because now that we have a reliable relational data source that's seeded with Office, well, yeah, that's a game changer.
Yep.
So usually we have Gary here, and he loves the development side. He fills a nice development role, and he can't be here. He's got Joyce with the kids, but he had a couple of questions. What's the application lifecycle management story? So in terms of deploying into Dataflex and things like that, presumably there isn't one. That's a Dataflex Pro story.
This is also interesting, right? So I don't actually have loads of info here, but I'll tell you guys what I know. So Dataflex Pro, you've got the concept of solution management and then patching and things. So you can, you guys know, you can add components into a solution, then move them around. What I know is that it will be similar to an extent. They're working in solutions, but I haven't had the opportunity to touch the back end yet. But I think that, because this is all built on the same structure as the common data service of Dataflex Pro, and I think you'll just have a very similar experience. That's what I'm hoping.
I think, because we've got environments involved. Being able to publish a solution into an environment and have all of that solution layering in that environment.
Yeah,
I would certainly hope that they're going to be doing that, because they've been building so much around the ALM story for solutions in Power Platform for CDS. I would hope that they're reusing that, making sure that that's exactly the same process for this.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's going to be the case. Yeah, they're not mucking around with ALM. They are really doing some crazy stuff. So yeah, that's going to get interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's already moved forward so far.
I think we've talked about on the show quite how excited we were by the Powerful Devs conference. That kind of blending between the lines of dev and power user and making it a kind of stream of things is brilliant. So yeah, and then Gary's asking about the API endpoints, but I think you've said there that you expect that a lot of the things will still be available, so it'll pull through from there. I know we're going on quite a while. I can see you're getting distractions appearing at the window there, Chris. It's good to see you. You have these budget window cleaners appearing. It's good use. So.
Budget window cleaners, I like that. I'm going to keep that one.
There was one other question around the governance story, but I think we kind of covered that you won't get the full Dataflex Pro, so the COE is going to play a large part, but I think there'll be more coming out around that as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Al, any other questions or things around licensing? I think we've covered all the ones that came in.
I think we've covered the ones that came in. I think our whole license. I mean, I know that I'm working at the moment on 2 or 3 different projects that immediately I'm kind of going, I might need to rethink those now.
Yeah.
And that's on one hand really exciting because I can see at least one of them being an immediate candidate for going to use Dataflex and the Canvas apps in Teams. And the other one, I think there's probably still the same cost. The same questions to ask around the value and how it will work, and possibly it's still the same conclusion that Dataflex will be better because it's got more capabilities. So I think it's going to be a really interesting journey over the next 2 to 3 months as we start to get our hands dirty playing with this and really find out, where it sits and what those decision points are between using Dataflex Pro, model-driven apps, etc.
Yeah, it is going to be an interesting time, and I think if you're a solution architect right now, it's going to be great fun. Like they've just added a whole bunch of new Lego bricks to the box of Lego that we use. So
absolutely. Yeah, they've got new shapes and everything.
Exactly.
It's not just new colors; it's new shapes.
Yeah, I've literally been playing with a brick of Lego for like an hour and a bit now. I'm not even kidding you guys. Like I've literally taken this thing apart like 6 times. While we've been talking.
And like any good Lego solution, we know we're going to tread on bricks every now and then. It's going to hurt like something I can't say because we're doing a child-friendly podcast, but it'll all be worth it for the fun and benefit you can get. One final question, and I'm looking at the site and I know the answer to this, but for anyone listening, Dataflex with a lowercase f, correct?
Yes, Dataflex. Well, I got taken to school. Dataflex with a lowercase f. Yeah. Yes.
And I'm looking at. I think it was actually the question from Nigel that I've copied and pasted. Nigel Price on Twitter, who said, "What is the difference between Dataflex lowercase f and Dataflex Pro with a capital F in there?" So I think there will be lots of fun and games.
Sorry, and did you say there was a space or not a space?
The space program. Yeah.
Starting off with that without a space, but the space will be on the roadmap.
Yeah, space, it will be part of the space program.
It's not Power Dataflex. It's definitely Dataflex.
Oh, Charles the one actually put that on Twitter. He's like, don't call it Power Dataflex. It's not that. It's Microsoft Dataflex. So I was like, yeah, that's actually a good point because we want to work with everyone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which I think is good. And again, I love seeing the teams in Microsoft come together. So you've got the Microsoft Teams and now we're seeing the Power Platform coming in there. And yeah, I know we've loved this fun and games of fighting between SharePoint and Dynamics worlds. And I do like a nice bit of antagonism for fun, but actually in reality it's because we all love each other and think it can all work well together. So it is all absolutely fun and games. Mostly, some people it's not, but I think for all of us it's a nice bit of try not to say banter, but it's that banter and the fun games that goes with it.
It's because we care. Yeah, it's because we care. Obviously, it's like if we didn't care, we wouldn't have this level of disagreement with one another. But it's good. You have to have opinions, right? And like I said this to Nigel actually ages ago. As much as Nigel and I fight on Twitter, he's the legend, man. And but it's great because he teaches me stuff every time. He makes me think. Like Nigel makes me think.
Yep.
And it's great, right? So when we do have these discussions, it's great because we're forced to think and we're forced to understand more. And that's why I love this. So like massive thanks to you guys for bringing me onto this, because I actually had to do a bit of research to make sure I was on the money with some of this stuff.
Oh, we like to keep you on your toes, Chris.
That's it, man. That's it.
No, for me, I think actually the licensing has got a lot simpler. I think it's a lot more obvious now. You're not talking about the P1s, P2s, and different things there. I think the current model, and with Dataflex, absolutely, it's the right licensing model for the right time and things. And as long as we can get some nice cheap bots in there, then I think we'll all be happy.
Yes.
Lots of bots.
More bots.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any final word, Chris, before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say, I guess I just want to say, like I said before, guide then guidance. So please look at the licensing guide. It's not hard. They've given already some really great tables. They've shared a lot of really awesome information in there. And then reach out if you get stuck. You will get stuck on things like multiplexing. There is no actual answer. It is like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So as long as you can basically back up what you're doing, you're fine. And like I said in the very beginning, if you see the cookie on the table and like you feel as if taking it is wrong, it's probably not a good idea. And that's the same with licensing. So just yeah, and obviously the communities are the best place to get the information. I know Kevin and Alan, you guys do loads of stuff in the community. So just feel free to reach out to anyone on Twitter. That's what I'd say, and we will help where we can.
And even if you can start a big conversation on Twitter, that will help the community as well. So yeah.
And I'm sure Nigel will pop up there any second. So
Nigel gets summoned the minute there's a licensing question. Nigel will do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, you know what? Can I tell you, Nigel's strategy has worked really well because Nigel is now infamous.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But as you say, he asked the right question, so heart of gold. Heart of gold, subtlety of sledgehammer. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you very, very much for joining us, Chris. Don't forget to listen to the first part of the show, and I hope we weren't too rude and talking about you being drunk in a corner somewhere. On that side, so.
I wish it was.
Yeah. Exactly. But thanks very much for joining us, and I hope we'll see you at some of the user groups and things soon. And otherwise, I've been Gray.
I've been Hats.
And Chris has been our stand-in beard. We're back in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much. Speak to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard Podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.